think we're good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, and thanks, Barry, and to the design team. It really was a great privilege to meet with our CEO, who was Dan Devine. See, we got a group picture with him at the very end of our interview with him. Unlike some of the other teams, we were actually here at the Embassy Suites meeting in a hotel room with him. So it was kind of comfortable and cozy, and became a nice, maybe a little more informal, but it became a very nice conversation we got to have as a group with him. Before I talk about Dan Devine, so this is our team. So we have Sandy Henkel, Carrie Hagan, Tom Norris, and Darren Holland, and I'm Sean McKenna. So let me just talk about a little bit about our team organization and how we even, so it's very organic, obviously, as I'm sure your teams were, as we got together in the room. We just introduced ourselves, figured out what our strengths were. We used our strengths finders results, and kind of figured out what's our objective, started brainstorming through ideas about how to meet that objective, and then figuring out, we didn't do any really strong roles, but we did figure out, what our strengths were. We know Darren was great with taking notes and doing PowerPoint, and by the end, when we structured the interview, I ended up becoming the facilitator, kind of a point person to kind of lead us through. We just divided the interview into certain segments based on certain themes, which we certainly took from the leadership framework. We certainly explored the leadership framework as far as coming up with the questions and brainstorming questions, and really getting at the heart of also what we wanted to know as well from our own, personal leadership growth. But then making sure we had leadership framework kind of covered, and it really did naturally kind of come out that way as far as being able to cover everything. So Dan Devine, man, he is a busy man. His wife Jackie, 4 kids, a couple cats, dogs, and a horse as well. But he is an entrepreneur, businessman. He, at the age of 31, ventured out to start what became Compass Knowledge Group, which focuses on distance learning, providing distance learning for partnering with major universities around the country. He said it took him about 10 years of just grinding before it kind of blossomed into, he ended up selling his company in 2010 to Embanet. They actually partnered for a while there, but he sold his company for $150 million in 2010. And actually, I'm sorry, he partnered, and then 2 years later turned around and sold that for $450 million, just large numbers. And now he's just trying to figure out what to do with life after this. But I'll tell you what, he just threw that in there way down the interview. He didn't lead with that at all. What he really led with was, and actually here, the next slide, was this. And I'm so, leading relationally from the heart. And wow, I'm like, that's exactly at the center of our leadership framework. There's relationships connecting all the roles together. He was just a people person. It came out time and time again of how he answered what he talked to. He focused on people, and the results would come. He didn't focus on results first. He focused on building into people. I think he was a very strong coach developer, and that came out in almost all of his answers to us. You could see that repeatedly, but he really valued people, and especially in his company. That was his primary focus. He talked about how most companies will take care of the shareholders. He focused on actually building a strong work environment, making it a positive work environment, and making sure people were well taken care of. And he said, the results would follow from that. And so, I'll actually turn over to Sandy for the next slide.
Hello. I'm kind of coming off of Sean because we were all impressed with Dan's ability to put people first, and yet how he did that. One of the quotes he said to us again, kind of further in, was, "Everyone is the world's best at something," and it's almost like his desire to find out what is your world's best and help you get to that place. So that's his emphasis on on the employees that he had under his care, was to see, well, where do they fit? Where do they align? Is this going to be a good place for them? he doesn't want to waste their time and their talents in putting them in positions that aren't fulfilling and satisfying to him. So that was just really challenging and encouraging, while at the same time being able to see that he wasn't, one of the things I had down is how to have a relational focus while at the same time honoring his core values of efficiency and results. You could see the relational focus in all of the roles of the leadership model, and yet he was very strong at strategic formulation and vision casting and all of those other areas. He wasn't just, well, I just want to build relationships. He took his people where he wanted them to go, and they were, you could get the sense that they were glad to go with him because he was so relational, so caring. In fact, he said at one point that when the company gets over about 120 staff, it's getting too big for him, because then he can't remember everybody's name and all their children's names and whose mother is sick and all those things. So he intentionally, once the business started getting beyond him, he would merge or sell. But he was very, very successful at getting the right people in the right position. Some of the things that I saw from that is his ability to delegate, and which was challenging, I think, because he admitted that he's a perfectionist. And so how he delegated over to his staff and his leaders, I felt like that was a strong takeaway point for me of how to do that, and how he talked about having to release perfection, but at the same time maintain direction. So it was a very clear, this is where we were going, but it didn't have to be the exact way he would do it, because he would do it perfectly. And so that was one of the things I really got out of that. Let me see if there was the other. I guess one of the other points there that was challenging for me is the whole aspect of satisfaction, both for himself and for those he served over, he led. He talked about at one point where he was in a job that just was not satisfying. He couldn't even get out of bed, is what he said. And it was because he recognized his need is for direct interaction with those he's serving. And you could see that being translated again into those he was developing as his leaders and his staff and his employees. So it was just a great opportunity, and I could see that playing itself out within our ministry in many ways, of trying to find people for the right positions, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are as they come onto our teams, and getting them aligned in those same places well, and looking, well, what are they world's best at on our team? You know, if God has them here for this season, what does that look like? How do we get them in those places where they are satisfied and thriving in that role? And then one of the other points was he was really willing to hold them to accountable standards, that it wasn't just, he wasn't so relational that, well, you could just do whatever you want as long as you're satisfied. He had vision and direction, and he held people accountable, and if they didn't hold up to that, he would make sure some things happened. There were consequences to their decisions. And so I really appreciated that aspect of his care for his team, but also his efficiency in getting to the goals that he set. And you could see by the success of his businesses that he was very good at both of those. So.
One of the things I spoke with Dan about was if he'd ever managed change, and how did he go about that. He gave me a couple examples, and I see the same theme coming through about having the right people in the right places. One of the changes that he had to manage was creating a different culture, a different set of values within the company, and so one of the first things he did was to bring people on board that could help facilitate that change. And what they did is they identified what values they wanted to be true of their organization, and then they had to repeat it over and over and over again. He said he was surprised that, and I've experienced this too, when you think you've communicated something to your team, but then you find out later they just didn't hear it, they just didn't get it. And so that was a theme. One of the themes was you've got to repeat over and over your messaging, whether it's mission, vision, and values, or what have you. And so that's one of the things that they did to help manage that change. He gave a quote, "Culture is always decaying, so you need to invest in it." And so he was very deliberate about creating that culture that he wanted to be true of his organization. Another change that he had to manage was he wanted to take his organization to the next level. And so his company had a certain value, but he realized the leaders that he had in place were not capable of taking that company to the next level. And so he had to do the hard thing of replacing, or in some cases demoting, these leaders and putting higher quality people in place. And he more than doubled the value of the company prior to selling it by doing so, but that was a very hard change to manage. Another question I had for him was with regard to alignment. I have some issues with a team that I manage that is not fully aligned to the methods that we're trying to use. And so I said, how have you had to deal with this, and what kind of advice do you have? One of the things he said is that first you need to make sure the team agrees that there is an issue of alignment, make sure they're aware of it. And then he suggested challenging them to solve it. Put it on them to say, hey, can you come up with a solution for this? He said, if you identify that there's a particular individual that's out of alignment, you may need to consider removing that individual to create better alignment on your team. Excuse me. He encouraged me to listen to the team, hear them, make sure they're heard, but at the same time, make sure they understand that they can disagree, but at the end of the day, they have to align. And I think that's important as well. So I think that's something that we can take away. One of the big takeaways that I had from our entire time was just his value of investing in people, his value in relationships. And he quoted his father saying, if you can make those around you, successful, you will be successful. So it really was about building others up around you in order for the team to succeed. So I feel like that's very relevant, and I'm going to be considering that as I continue to lead my team.
Okay, grab a piece of paper or a little slip, something to write with. If you had 12 minutes to accomplish something, you have 12 minutes a day to accomplish something. Write down one or two things you could accomplish in 12 minutes a day, real quick. Okay. Anybody write staff meeting? Raise your hand if you wrote staff meeting. Yeah, I didn't think anybody could. This was my biggest takeaway. Dan, every morning, Monday through Friday, met with all his direct reports for 12 minutes a day at 8:48. From 8:48 to 9, they did a stand-up meeting in the boardroom, touch base for 12 minutes, and they were done every day. And then, of course, he'd have a longer staff meeting at other times. Great coaching tool, great way to keep people motivated, on the same page. He talked about having a 1 to 2 page document of their goals and mission for the year ongoing, so it's a great time to review that, make sure people are on the same page. Creates a culture of communication, regularly connecting with each other, and it also created a culture of accountability. As he said, unless somebody's on vacation, if they didn't come into that meeting at 8:48, they'd get an email from him later that day checking in on where they were. And if they're, he has salespeople and other people reporting to him, if they're out on the field and they don't call in at 8:48, they'd get an email for whatever reason. This applies to me. I'm on an inner city team in LA, very mobile team. We're serving anywhere from 30 to 50 church partners all around LA. So sometimes we're very mobile. We're out meeting with pastors or ministry leaders. One of my main guys, David, is in Compton. It's about a 40-minute drive in traffic for him to get to the office. He doesn't want to come into the office every day. For his own sanity and development, I don't want to require him to do that. And we're not an office-based team. So this was a great idea for me to begin to think about how can we, as a mobile team, have regular checkpoints. So I'm probably not going to do it every day, but I was thinking Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Wednesday's our regular staff meeting. Monday and Friday we'll book in the week, and we'll have a 12-minute meeting via Google Chat video. He also talked about how it's, rather than doing phone calls, it's better to be able to see the person and really check in. His heart is for his people, to really see how they're doing. He's like, you get a real sense just being able to see somebody's face. So using 12 minutes a day for that. So that's a huge takeaway for me as I head back to my team, and I think that'll help me create some further build on accountability with my staff. And he talked about giving it some time. There's going to be some resistance to that kind of thing at first. None of us likes meetings, so even working through some of that resistance. And then I thought about Crew National. This applies a little bit. We have a lot of people, mobile staff out there, both individually and mobile teams, that maybe there's not a lot of check-in and communication with those teams. I know there's been a challenge within the city division on some of that. I had a young lady actually call me from my city. She's not on a team. She's like, I kind of have somebody I'm reporting to. Tom, can I come to your staff meetings a couple times a month? This challenged me and made me think there needs to be some changes. She needs to have more than a check-in twice a month with our team, who she doesn't even report to me. But it just made me think about that culturally within Crew. Trying to think about anything else. This also, the one other takeaway, it's going to help me maximize my Wednesday staff meetings. As we got people driving in, I tend to spend 40 minutes connecting with each other. Everybody wants to connect. If I have those other 2 times over the week where we can do some more connection time, it'll help me maximize my Wednesday meetings so we can get more done and deepen those relationships and create even a further culture of communication on our team. So 12 minutes. Think about what you can do with 12 minutes.
So when Sandy was up here, she was mentioning that he said everyone can be the world's best at something, and it's a matter of discovering what that is. And so we turned that on him and said, what Dan, are you the world's best at? And I don't know if he said I'm the world's best at it, but he said, I'm guessing it's in this category, that I can take the complex, simplify it, and then energize others towards that goal. And we felt like, man, does that not capture the leadership framework in that? And you can tell that by nature, he's good at making the complex simple. He was an engineering major at Florida, so he gets complexity and making it simple. But what his heart really beats for is coaching and motivating people, and that's where the energize comes through. So he really enjoys taking the complex to simple, but then energizing others. As Tom just mentioned, that having a one-page plan or one-page overview of what's most important on our radar right now. Another way to bring simplicity out of complexity. All of us have plans that could be much longer than 1 page, and sometimes up to 100 or 200 pages, as we talked about. But to get them on 1 page for the team and to have that as their North Star, he said he's found that really to be important for him in casting vision and aligning the team to where they're going. One thing he talked about was appreciative inquiry, and I think this goes with energizing his team. He would talk about how as an engineer, sometimes he can always be looking for problems, and I think I relate with that, always seeing where the problems are, the problems to be solved. And he said appreciative inquiry turns that and says, let's look for where things are going right, and let's really focus on that, and praise people for where they're doing well, and identify the things that we're doing well as an organization, as a team, and that actually will solve a lot of the problems along the way. Outside of work, this shows up. He talked about his kids. He has a simple goal for his kids, that they live their life to their full potential. He said that can manifest itself in a ton of different ways, but at the end, he wants to energize his kids toward living a life that matters and that has reached their full potential. So it showed up outside of work as well as in. But you could tell that is Dan. Complex, simple, energize. I feel like that captured him. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Okay, so we just wanted to share a few resources that he recommended. Gazelle's website, gazelles.com, had tons of great resources. Anybody have any input on that website that you saw? Because I know, Sandy, you were looking at it. Maybe a quick explanation.
Gazelles is like a leadership website, mostly for small business owners. But he just highly recommended it. He talked about it several times. He talked about nonprofits that he's been working with, having them go through some of the materials on there. There's information on there about getting those core values in your mission statement down to a 1-page or 2-page document, things like that. So it just seemed like it was a ton of resources that would be really helpful for us to tap into.
Top grading. Trying to remember the author, Bradford D. Smart. Top grading is a whole interviewing, finding the right people process. And he's stuck on this where interview was 3 to 4 hours long, and it allowed him to find out people's strengths and weaknesses and figure out whether they were a good fit for his organization. There's some challenges there for us as a nonprofit Sometimes within our culture, we tend to take somebody who's a warm body. At least that's been true sometimes historically in the inner city ministry. If they're willing to come, we'll take them, and not as much concerned about whether they're a good fit on our team. So it made me continue to think about being careful who we add to our team, being intentional to put the right people on our team, finding out their strengths and weaknesses. And he didn't say, doesn't mean you don't take them, but if we need to be aware of weaknesses so we can develop that person in those areas if we're going to bring them on our team. So top grading, Rockefeller habits, and he said especially on there's a section in there on the meetings and the 12-minute meeting idea and how to use that time. I have one of the guys, another reason why this meeting got me excited is because my guy in Compton sometimes struggles with motivation with not having regular touch points. He's an engineer, just like Dan's an engineer, and Dan talked about he's energized by being around people. And so as I thought about this guy on my team, thought just the regular contact touch points every day is going to really help keep him engaged and keep him motivated. And then we'd already kind of done that a little bit with him, and I've seen some results. So now just to kind of up it to the next level really encouraged me, and it kind of reinforced things that we were thinking. So those are a few of the resources he recommended. Okay, I know that we're supposed to have some time for Q&A. So questions? Steve. Yeah, maybe a couple. So for me, the staff meeting can be taken surfacey. My heart behind that is I don't want to add 12 minutes a day to my schedule. But as I think about the motivational level of my team and for their own development to keep them engaged, that's why I'm going to do that. So even that resonated with his heartbeat of caring for people. I want my team engaged and motivated and caring about our mission. So that's one way. And thinking about this young man, David, on my team, I'm doing that for him. Because ultimately, I actually wouldn't really want to do that meeting. But doing it for people like that to keep them engaged is one thought on that.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me was he talked about walking around the office every once in a while, just saying how people are doing, walking through, saying hi. He knows people by name. He's like, yeah, I'm interrupting them, but it's a relational time. And he makes it got the impression he really enjoys being with his people. And he made it almost like a family environment, it seemed like. And I was encouraged too, because for me, he's an introvert engineer. I'm an introvert engineer, computer science major. And I feel like I struggle with getting out there. And he's like, yeah, I don't go in and network a room or things like that. My relationships are intentional and focused, but he is making his way around and relating with the people he needs to relate with, and he does it well. And he schedules time for it. It seems to me, it's very intentional what he's doing. So. And it makes a big payoff. So,
yeah, I would agree as well. I have engineering background, very task-oriented, want to get things done, want to get as much done as I can throughout the day. It's not natural for me to want to just walk around and get into people's lives, and so I'm going to be more deliberate about that for sure.
Yeah, and one thing that we're measured on in operations is whether people have received praise or recognition for doing good work in the last 7 days. We actually measure that twice a year. And I feel like, man, it is so good. We can't overpraise our team. And it's amazing how sometimes it'll come out that people aren't feeling like they've received that, and how much we need to praise people for them to actually feel it, for it not to actually be done for them to feel it. And I just feel like for me to not just be working on solving the problems, but for praising my people and building into them by affirming where the good work is being done.
Since everybody else answered, I should answer, right? But I'm going to flip it on the other end. I'm much more bent toward the relational end and the caring for staff. So for me, what I got out of that is that holding people accountable and to a measure of expectations is caring for them as well. That's just as important, but they go together. I've seen it modeled both ways, I think, and so he was an excellent model to me of how he balances those two, where he's still taking the team in a direction, but he's having much compassion and concern for them in that process. So it was kind of the other way around for me. Did you have a question?
Well, just repeat the question.
Yeah, she asked about the culture is decaying comment, the quote that he had. And I think what his intention was that if left alone, whatever culture you're trying to create will not be there. So you have to reinforce it, yet it tends towards chaos. And so you want to reinforce it. You want to reinforce the values, make sure everybody's on board with what are the values, and you have to just keep repeating it. The mission, keep repeating it over and over again. Otherwise, people just forget, and they start going their own direction. So you want to keep them aligned and going in the same direction.
Yeah, I remember when I was challenged in my current role, somebody said, leaders build culture. And that kind of stuck with me, and how that's part of our job is to create the kind of culture that we want to have under our leadership, and that if we're not doing that, it's going towards something else most likely. Other questions? Mark? Yeah, well, anyone want to jump in? Okay, go ahead.
I think it's similar to church dynamics. I mean, if you have a church of 50 people, you can know everybody. And once it gets beyond a certain point, you feel kind of there's this anonymity, or you can't know it. And it was a high value for Dan to know everybody. And I think what you have to do is that if the group is growing bigger, you have to set realistic expectations that I can't know everybody when it gets beyond a certain amount. But there are certain core people that I can know. And I would suggest that you would structure it so that you can know those that you can know, and maybe impart that to the leaders to make sure the rest are covered. So,
Yeah, and I think for Dan, if he were to stay engaged in a large organization, let's say he were part of Crew, it'd probably be really important for him to stay connected at the ground level. It seemed like that he really liked knowing everyone at all levels of the organization. And so that would seem like something that would be important as he's leading bigger, and maybe keeping his relationships at that size as the organization grows. But that mixed in there are people that are doing all levels within the organization, would be my guess. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so what are you trying to accomplish with a 12-minute meeting besides looking at each other? Yeah, well, I think probably all of us can offer a thought, but I think he just said, when you get face-to-face with people, you can read them. And he said if there was a couple days that would go by and he could tell that something was up, that would be his note. He needs to check in with that person and see what's going on. Is it personal? Is it professional? And he felt like the phone doesn't do that, nothing like getting face-to-face. And he said that was a key part of that meeting, was even just knowing his people and being able to care for them.
One of the other things is that his point of the meeting, though, just wasn't relational. It wasn't like everybody's checking in, how are you doing today? They were checking in on their job. And if they had something to say about their job, they would just touch base with the rest of the leadership team that was present. So everybody was on the same page. So, but he could visually, and he could see how people were doing, and may come back to that later. But the point of the meeting was checking in on their job and what they were doing that day.
And just one add on there, he did mention, it's not a time to point out problems or find problems necessarily, but it seemed very much like a relational touch point for him to see people face to face, say good morning, how's it going, to make sure people are doing well. So.
I'm wondering if any of y'all would be willing to just give a nugget about what you're the world's best at.
Sean, you've got the mic.
I've got the mic. Well, it's my strengths finder, tells me I'm a learner, but I've seen the Lord use me time and again in basically analyzing complex data, to find trends, to organize information, taking vast amounts of information and condensing it into an organized way that people can understand kind of what's going on there with all this vast information out there. I have the IT background in doing that, but and I've done it as well with theology, frankly. Went to RTS, Orlando, got a Master of Divinity, but I found myself taking theology and organizing charts, you know, for people and classmates. Oh, I want that chart, you know, help me study for that test or whatever. But really taking, again, organizing, taking large amounts of information, organizing it in a way and presenting it in a way people can understand.
Wow, that's a tough question when it's off the top of my head. So I think two thoughts came to mind. One would be spokesperson for our organization, getting out there, sharing a story. I see my wife nodding her head. That I thrive in that. You give me 5 minutes, hey, you got to go present Here's Life or Crew Inner City now. I love to just tell a few stories, and this is why our ministry, this is why we do what we do, and this is how we're seeing God work in the city. So that's one. And then I think developing people. I really love the time with Dan, because just hearing his heart for people, sitting down one-on-one and coaching and developing my staff is why I took on the role I did. It's because I wanted to be able to have that opportunity to develop my staff.
Our team a couple of years ago went through, or I guess that was just last year, an exercise that helped us come up with our distinctive design, which is basically what we love to do. And one of the things that as I've kind of worked on where that is for me, it's coming alongside women, specifically in urban ministry, and affirming them, encouraging them, listening to them so that they can live out that calling in their life in a full and satisfying way. So that would be where I don't know if I'm world's best, but I really enjoy that.
Yeah, and I actually hope this process of SLI would help to narrow that focus down to maybe more of a pinpoint. I think right now my intuition would be that it's in the thinking domain somewhere in bringing my thinking strengths to bear. But exactly the world's best, I'm not there yet. But I would hope that over time that I move towards that. Yeah.
World's best is a stretch for sure, but I enjoy problem solving and coming up with creative solutions to complex problems. So.
I have a little follow-up question. There's not time, it's just a raise your hand question. If you got to use some of those talents on this team yesterday and today, raise your hand.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Very good.
Give them a hand. While the other team is setting